I purchased the original Panasonic S5 instead of the newer S5 II and IIX variants, and this is why I think you should as well. Panasonic has made some iconic cameras over the years. From the GH2 to the VariCam and GH5, there's been no shortage of cinematic horsepower from them. The GH5 was one of the most popular cameras for documentary filmmakers and content creators in the late 2010s. And with the release of the Lumix S5, they practically made a full-frame version of it. The S5 II improved on the Mark I with the long-awaited phase detect autofocus system and no recording limits. This upgrade is a no-brainer for Lumix fans, especially those who record long-winded YouTube videos or film themselves. But does this mean that the original S5 is irrelevant? Is there any way we can work around some of these limitations, and if so, should you consider picking one up? Let's figure it out. So let's get into why I bought this camera in the first place. I needed a hybrid camera to produce content for my YouTube channel. I require something that can record good video while also being able to take stills, which I will then use for my thumbnails. While there are many options for mirrorless hybrid cameras these days, I decided to go with Lumix because I have a long history of shooting on their Micro Four Thirds cameras. Furthermore, I wanted something with good image stabilization and preferably a full frame sensor, since I intended to use vintage glass and I wanted to capture the entire image circle of said glass. The Panasonic full-frame cameras checked off these boxes. I was also tempted by the price these go for used as compared to a lot of Sony cameras. But the question is, why didn't I go with one of the newer models? After all, the S5 II and IIX improve on this camera's limitations. Let's jump right into the reasons why. Pro number 1, image quality. Though the S5 II and IIX are newer and better cameras, the original S5 is very comparable in terms of image quality. The original S5 allows you to shoot Apple ProRes and ProRes RAW via HDMI, which is something that really levels the playing field when it comes to image quality. Though the internal codecs are more limited on the S5 versus the II and IIX, I still find that the files straight out of the camera look outstanding. Some limitations, however, include that the 4K 60 is being limited to 8-bit color depth, though this was also the case with the GH5. And all of the codecs are long GOP rather than the superior but much larger all-intra codec formats. However, none of this really matters if you end up using an Atomos Ninja V, and you're going to want to do that if you want to take advantage of the ProRes and ProRes RAW capabilities. If you're making films like I often am, you're going to want to use a monitor anyway, and so recording to one doesn't seem like a giant deal, but more on that later. Pro number 2, the price. The Panasonic S5 is around $400 cheaper than the S5 II. That is, when comparing used prices on average. I purchased my S5 for a mere $750 on MPB, which is an incredible deal. This cost savings can be put towards extra batteries, rigging, a monitor, lenses, any number of other things. And at this price point, it's really hard to say no to the Panasonic S5 given its capabilities. And it just goes to show the unbelievable quality you can get nowadays for not a lot of money. There's really no better time to be a filmmaker. Con number 1, recording limit. So on to our first con. This camera has a 30-minute recording limit, and this is one of the major limitations it has that keeps it from truly being a full-frame GH5. Similarly to our first point about getting improved codecs from the Ninja V, the same device also solves this limitation. When paired with the Ninja V, the Panasonic S5 has no recording limits, and I've even used this combination for 2-hour-plus recording sessions. So for my use case, I don't really view this as a con. However, this can still be an issue for you if you would prefer to use the camera as is, without any accessories. If you prefer the small form factor of a mirrorless camera, and you don't want to build it out into a cumbersome rig, which I totally understand, then you will run into the recording limit. This can be a problem if you're recording for long sessions, especially if you have to start and stop the recording multiple times, and that could require you to resync your audio. I used the Panasonic S5 without a recorder for my first couple of sessions for my new podcast, and there was an instance where we thought we were recording and we weren't. We ended up going on a whole tirade and we didn't even end up capturing it. The monitor, however, solved this issue for future podcast episodes. If you're interested in listening to a podcast by filmmakers for filmmakers, then check out the Your Next Film podcast by me and Mateo. Link to that will be in the description. Con number 2, micro HDMI cable. Almost any filmmaker will tell you that the micro HDMI is not an ideal connection type, especially if you're in a run and gun production kind of scenario. You run the pretty significant risk of breaking this connection. If this happens to you, you'll either have to send the camera in for repair, buy a new camera, or just cut your losses and not use a monitor. This can be terrible, especially if you were counting on using something like the Ninja V to record your footage onto. You'll have to deal with the internal recording options, which, as we discussed earlier, aren't quite as good. One solution for this is to use a cable clamp. This greatly reduces the risk of breaking your HDMI cable during production. Unfortunately, though, this will be the Achilles heel of my specific setup because the cage I have for my S5 is a bit too large, comes out a bit too far, and none of the cable clamps I have quite reach the ports on the side. So lately, I've just had to be extra careful. The next con is that the rear display is a bit dim, and there have been a few occasions where I found it to be difficult to focus while using it outside. Again, however, this problem is easily resolved by using a brighter and larger monitor with this camera. And this seems to be the theme here. If you're using a recording monitor like the Atomos Ninja V, almost all of the drawbacks of this camera are remedied. If you don't mind using a Ninja V with this camera and you like the superior image quality you get from recording to ProRes RAW, then saving a bit of money and buying the original S5 might be worthwhile. Additionally, if you only record in short bursts, then the recording limit won't be much of an issue. Really, what it comes down to is this: do you need long recording limits straight from the camera? Or do you mind using an external accessory to do this while also providing superior image quality? The second consideration is, do you require good autofocus? Con number 4, autofocus. The S5 II and IIX both have improved phase detect autofocus systems. This makes them well suited to self-filming or to any situation where manual focusing quickly might be difficult. For example, in run and gun shooting scenarios. For myself, however, I only use manual lenses. I have an entire set of Nikon AIS lenses, and because those are the ones that I use and they work really well with this camera setup, not having good autofocus isn't as much of a con for me, but I could see how it would be a con for someone else. That being said, I think the original Panasonic S5 is still an excellent buy. I found that it slots perfectly into my workflow, and I don't find its limitations to be that limiting. Of course, though, you need to determine what equipment is going to work best for you and your needs. That being said, a camera is only one piece of the equation when it comes to building out your filmmaking kit. If you're eager to learn more about what gear you should be investing in, be sure to check out this video here, and I hope to see you there.